Well, good morning to you all again. Thank you for joining us as we kind of close out this series called Recalibrate. This has been a series and it's been a journey to dive into what it means to live lives that align with what the teachings of Jesus were and how we can live more fuller and more intentional relationships as we navigate life and we navigate this journey of faith together. It's been the hope of this series that has maybe challenged you in some way in your current life, in the current steps that you're taking. To look at the way we go about our every single day, to see where we might be just a little bit off, the places where we might have veered just that 1 degree from what Jesus has taught us to be. And maybe it's challenged you to see that it didn't matter so much at the beginning of your journey, but the longer we get into it, the longer we do it, the further from God and from where God has intended us to be for our lives today. Maybe you've stayed the course, and over the course of time, you've been hurt by someone. Or maybe you've been hurt by a group of people. Perhaps this series has challenged you to understand that life-changing and the life-giving process that forgiveness can be for you. It doesn't change the pain of our past, doesn't change the hurt and what we've gone through, but it can give you freedom for the future. Maybe this series has challenged you in your own perceptions of what it means to be in community. That it's okay that we're all different, that we have different abilities, and that those differences we can find unity under one common goal to share the gospel in the areas that we have been planted. Now, this journey to recalibrate led us to last week where we had to wrestle with things like our own words. We had to address how we say things and the actions that we take that follow those words. And that through our words, we have the ability to build someone up or to tear them down. Ultimately, this series has been designed around how we interact with one another through the bonds of the church and through the bonds of faith that give us a deeper understanding of who Jesus Christ is and how that has changed our lives. But that doesn't mean we won't have conflict. Right? Yeah. There will be times that we disagree, right? There will be tension. There will be misunderstanding. And the real question is, in those times, when those times come, how do we react? How do we handle conflict resolution as a body of believers following what Jesus has taught us to be? And is it something that we need to recalibrate? The truth is for us this morning is that conflict resolution isn't easy. And take that from someone who finds it incredibly difficult, trust me. But when we really think about it for just a minute, when conflict comes up between you and someone else or you and a group of people, what do? Do you charge in head first to someone and tell them why they're wrong, right? Do you call them out in front of a group of people? Do you hide from it? Or maybe you just sweep it under the rug and hope it never comes up again and it just goes away, right? Or maybe you're like me and when conflict comes up, you feel this tension inside of your body and your nerves go haywire and you don't know what to do and you get really stressed out by it. For many of us, this is a common reaction to conflict, to some sort of tension in our lives. But is that how it should be as believers? Is there another way to resolve the differences and the issues that are more aligned to the teaching of Jesus? A way to lead to deeper relationships and a more Christ-like way of living? Is it something we need to adjust our thought patterns about? Or the style in which we do something? To change our mindset and how we manage conflict to have a better result in the end? The reality for us this morning is that Jesus did give us a pattern for addressing conflict inside of a Christian community. And if we could understand all of these concepts that he is laying out, distill them down in our everyday walk, we can learn to resolve conflict more effectively in more of a way that aligns with what Jesus is trying to say. We can be able to resolve our conflicts with grace and that show Jesus between two people, between brothers and sisters, rather than continuing tension and conflict. We find Jesus teaching about this right in the middle of Matthew's account of the gospel. And within this account, Jesus is teaching in Galilee. teaching about personal communication between his disciples. And in Matthew 18, Jesus is recorded as saying this: "If another disciple sins against you," Jesus continued, "go and have it out with him, just between the two of you alone. If they listen to you, you've won back a brother or sister. But if they won't listen, you should take with you one or two others, so that everything may be established from the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they won't listen to them, tell it to the assembly. If they won't listen to the assembly, you should treat such a person like you would a Gentile or a tax collector. I'm telling you the truth. Whatever you tie up on earth will have been tied up in heaven. Whatever you untie on earth will be untied in heaven. Again, let me tell you the truth. If 2 of you come to an agreement on earth about a matter, that what you want to ask, it will be done for you in my Father's name in heaven. Yes, where 2 or 3 come together in my name, I will be there amongst them." What you have to love about what Jesus is teaching is that he doesn't turn from addressing the hard things, right? He understands probably more than most people and more than anyone that we live and operate in a fallen and a broken world. It's not all kumbaya and happy feelings, right? Jesus understands that there's going to be conflict. There is going to be tension. There's going to be struggle. And what Jesus is addressing in this text is how we need to handle that when that comes up. How we tackle the hard stuff when it comes up in our relationships. Is it with love and grace? In a way that is consistent, working towards bringing peace and resolution and restoration. See, Jesus opens his teaching by saying that we need to address conflict directly. The first instruction here is to address the conflict with the person to person. It's a conversation that should be handled privately first and addressed with honesty and humility. How often have we tried to address some kind of conflict or tension when we're still upset? We're still mad. Or we walk into a tense situation or a conversation trying to point out all the reasons why the other person might be wrong. Or we avoid directness and we try to sugarcoat the whole thing, saying it's not really a problem, I'm not really upset about it. But you cause more confusion to the person who's listening to you. Or maybe we just talk so we can have that gotcha moment at the end. I got you right there, right? I knew you were going to say that, so I wanted to say it back to you. It doesn't go well in conversations. And if we're being honest with each other, it's not often received well. In fact, we end up doing more damage to those people with the words that we have than anything else. And not to linger too much on what we talked about last week, but those words matter. Yes, we should address our feelings, and yes, we should speak about the things that are wrong and the things that have been done and the person who has committed those things. But how and when we do that matters a great deal. And if we let conflict just sit unresolved, what happens next? It festers inside of us. Bad feelings continue to grow. We only get more angry the more time goes on and on and on. Have you ever said or heard, "I can't believe they haven't apologized to me yet"? They should just know what they did wrong. Or maybe you know what you did. But the truth is, if we haven't addressed the offense, how do they know? If we haven't talked about it, how do they know? Before David became king of Israel, he was under King Saul. And there David became friends with Saul's son Jonathan. Now David became under attack by Saul because God had favored him to be the next king. And David believed that his friend Jonathan was also against him. So rather than run and become angry and get mad at his friend, David sought out Jonathan person to person and asked him, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me?" David didn't confront Jonathan with accusations or blame. He approached the conversation with humility, asking, what have I done to hurt you? Where have I gone wrong to make this happen? How often do we address conflict by accusing or attacking? Often the first step to addressing any conflict is to just pause. Think about what I did wrong. Think about my own fault in the matter. Or to fully understand what we're feeling before we go jumping in head first. And at the end of John's gospel, Jesus addresses Peter because of Peter's denial. And at this point in the story, this is the lowest point in Peter's story because he just messed up. And Jesus sat there and he talked to him. He didn't accuse. The conversation with Peter is filled with love and forgiveness. And at the end of that conversation, Peter is restored to the community. As believers in community with one another, we need to address conflicts directly, not through gossip or involving someone else before we've ever actually talked to the person first, but directly with grace over gotcha. And the truth is, that's hard. Right? That conversation is difficult to have. And it's much harder when we're upset, right? So before we dive in head first, why don't we pray for wisdom and pray for guidance? Ask God to show us the better way to have that conversation or better way to approach that conversation. Ask him to reveal our role in that conflict. Ask him to give us a spirit of peace to have a hard discussion with someone. Because the truth of this for us this morning is when we're trying to resolve conflict, we should be seeking reconciliation, not retaliation. We should seek reconciliation, not retaliation. If our goal is to resolve conflict with grace inside of a Christian community, then our end goal should always be reconciliation, not retaliation. Our goal shouldn't be to prove someone wrong or to get back or to get even. True conflict resolution seeks restoration. But is that our default? Is that our first instinct? How many of us at one time or another have sought to punish someone else for how they treated us? Maybe not intentionally, right? But your actions that follow how you feel become more and more negative. And the longer you hold on to those feelings, the more defensive you become. I believe that's a natural instinct of humanity in a fallen world. We want to defend ourselves. We want to protect our feelings, even seek retribution for the wrongs that have been committed against us. But if we're going to walk in the way that Jesus is teaching here in this text, we need to recalibrate our thinking. Jesus' ministry on earth taught something that was so much more different than what the world and our natural instincts tell us. When Jesus told the story of the prodigal son in Luke's account of the gospel, he tells of a son who selfishly takes all of his inheritance early. And then he takes it and he runs away. He squanders the money. He burns through it all. And with nothing left, he returns home. And what Jesus teaches here is not a father who condemns the wayward son, but one who shows compassion and love and care for his son and for what his son has endured. The father of this story, though he was probably hurt by his son's actions, restores his son to the family and throws a party rather than turning him away for what he's done wrong. The father's motives were one of peace and reconciliation and a grace that the son did not deserve. And that's how we've been treated by God the Father, right? We've been given grace that we don't deserve. And in turn, we are to show that grace and to seek reconciliation rather than retaliation. And when we approach conflict and how we approach it the next time it happens, what if we did that with grace in mind rather than our own anger or our own hurt feelings over whatever it is? How can we pursue a reconciled and resolved conflict rather than more hurt feelings? And the truth is, it's not going to be easy. You may need a day or two to kind of figure out and put in order what you're actually feeling and try to calm down. But when you enter those conversations, the mindset in which you enter them and the mindset that you go into those conversations will matter a great deal. Are we able to approach the way the Father did in this parable, leading with forgiveness and with grace? That even if you're the one who's been wronged, we can enter that conversation with kindness and with care for the other person. Seeking to understand what may have happened here, that it all took place. And it's not an easy task, and at the end, it's worth it for us to set on that path towards resolution and reconciliation. But there's going to be times where we can't come to a conclusion, right, together. We can't come to a conclusion one-on-one. And it may be hard to hear, but that's the truth. Not every problem can be resolved one-to-one. And Jesus addressed what we do in the morning's text. He addressed what we do next. There will be times that a private conversation isn't enough to bring resolution to what is going on. So when that time comes, Jesus says to seek mediation. Mediation can be a very effective tool in conflict resolution. See, but there's a common misconception with what Jesus is teaching here, right? Jesus says, if they won't listen, you should take one or two others so that everything may be established from the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And the truth is, in our brains and our patterns as human beings, we often interpret that I need to find 1 or 2 people who agree with me and then take that to the conversation so that they can tell the other person why they're wrong, right? That's what we do as human beings. We try to find people who agree with what I'm saying so that they can now gang up on this person who hurt me, and so I can feel better about it when we're all done, right? But that's not the purpose of mediation, and that's not what Jesus is saying here. It all comes back to our motives in conflict resolution. Do we just want the other person to acknowledge that we're right and they're wrong? Or are we seeking togetherness? The purpose of a mediator is to bring peace between 2 parties. If we've done the work to seek God's direction and have asked Him to reveal what our problem might have been in all of this, then mediation can help the process along more than a private conversation could have. We've seen it work throughout Scripture, throughout history. When Moses led the people out of Egypt, he sat before them day in and day out, hearing problems amongst the people, trying to handle them. St. Francis of Assisi mediated conflict throughout his entire community in the 12th century. And throughout his counsel, he promoted peace and understanding. That's the role of a good mediator. It's someone that's wise and whom we can trust, who can listen to us without blaming either side, without taking sides in the action. The mediator is there to bridge the gap between both parties so that they can come together. So who's that trusted person to you? Who can you turn to when a private conversation can't be resolved? Who can you trust to seek wisdom and guidance to help mediate what's going on right now in your life? The truth is that not everybody fits that billet, right? We all have different gifts. We've talked about that. Some have the gift of wisdom and discernment, so seek that person out. The role of mediation may be the very thing that you need right now to be reconciled to someone. Because the ultimate goal of any conflict, whether that be interpersonally or inside of the church or just in our everyday lives, the goal of conflict resolution should be restoring relationships. It should be about restoring relationships. Too often in this world, we are just so quick to cut people off. We turn our backs on them when our feelings are hurt. Or maybe you've given and you've given and you've given, and at the end, you've lost your ability to give anymore. So you walk away. Maybe you've done that without even saying a word, you just walked away. And the relationship is broken. And hurt fills the community up. I believe at one point or another in all of our lives, we have felt something like that. And maybe it's shaped how you resolve conflict now. But that's the very thing we need to change our mindset about. We need, as believers, to recalibrate our thinking around what Jesus is teaching here. That within a community of believers, we should be seeking restored relationships that model our relationship to God. Because of our salvation, because of what he did for us, we are restored to a right relationship to God. Jesus was the great mediator. He bridged the gap between our sin and the good God. And because of his sacrifice, we can now have a stronger and more full relationship with God that is built on trust and restoration. That's the model for us as believers, to seek reconciliation rather than ruin, grace over gotcha. And it's essential to the health and growth and the unity within any Christian community. To break down the walls of us versus them, or new versus old. We're able to disagree but still be united. To still be restored as one body. Paul and Barnabas, they had a pretty heated discussion within the book of Acts, so they decided to go their separate ways. But later on in Paul's writings, you see him speak of Barnabas in such a high manner, and it suggests that they've somehow resolved this conflict so that they can now together pursue the spreading of the gospel more fervently and more powerfully than before. Disagreement doesn't have to lead to the destruction of relationships. We can disagree, and yet we can find peace. We can find a common goal. We can resolve our conflict with grace because of the grace we have been shown. That comes through continuing the communication between both parties. And it may be hard at first, but the more we communicate, the more we will understand what someone is going through. And it comes through understanding that we can go through the same thing and we can support that other person. We can know what's going on. It comes through humility and understanding that we also have some part to play in the conflict, right? No one is blameless. We also may need to ask for forgiveness. And honestly, it comes through prayer. Prayer with and prayer for each other. Praying that God will reveal what is necessary to come to a common goal together, to move forward together. The reality for us all today is that conflict is going to come. It's going to exist. And conflict resolution is hard work. It takes wisdom to do it, and it takes understanding the way that Jesus is calling us to go. Jesus tells us to come into a conflict and to confront conflict directly, to go to that person who has hurt us and to address the issues with them face to face. And maybe we need a minute before we do that so that we can seek reconciliation rather than retaliation. Conflict resolution should bring us closer together rather than pull us further and further apart. And if person-to-person contact doesn't work, then we need to seek someone who is wise, who we can trust to be a mediator in that situation. Someone who's going to seek out the Lord for wisdom rather than their own wisdom in the issue. Because the ultimate goal of any conflict is to restore that relationship, not to ruin them. And that may be new to hear, and it may be hard to hear. But if we can recalibrate our thinking, if we can retrain our minds in the process, if we could refocus our attention onto what God would have us do inside of a Christian community, then we can begin to resolve with grace most conflicts, not all of them, but most of them that may arise, and it will lead to a healthier community, a healthier body. It means grace over gotcha. To value the relationship over my personal feelings and my own personal hurts. To seek restoration and a revived community. The question really is, what are you willing to do to have that? Are you willing to resolve it with grace? So think about that unresolved conflict in your life right now. How can you, over the next few weeks, approach a conversation over that issue with Matthew 18 in mind? What steps can you take this morning to see restored relationships that Jesus is talking about in this passage? And who comes to mind when you think about that? How can you resolve with grace starting now? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, teach us your way. Teach us what you would have us do. That we understand grace is hard. We understand conflict will come. But God, you've shown us the way to when it comes, we can handle it with grace and with understanding in a way that you have taught us to be. God, retrain our minds. Retrain our thoughts. Show us your way. Teach us your way, God. We give you all the praise and all the glory. It's in your name.